are these people?
Speaking of institutional crazy, this guy.
Yeah.
Um,
So as I said earlier, those of you who are new, or well, not new, well, it could be new. If you are, welcome. If you're now coming in, also welcome.
yeah,
We missed you all. But that's Macron looking at us with the demon eyes.
yeah,
We see that
laser eyes.
what it means, and then the person to the back is Macron, not Macron,
Modi.
Modi.
Yeah,
So yeah, so I'll say this: it's one thing when we have stories that you and I kind of pulled, like out of that we care about, that we resonate with, or whatever. This was a story that actually was pulled by one of our well, more specifically one of mine, but who I know mutually on Twitter. And actually, we've talked about this a lot. That's actually what we want.
yeah.
Like, we want you guys to share with us stories that are that you resonate with, that we're able to report on, because that's what we want to hear more of independent media, is your voices and the issues that you guys deal with in terms of what's happening, and like policies that are affecting your communities and your countries. Like, you're not going to necessarily hear from mainstream media, so if you're able to share those stories with us, we would love it. So so just kind of giving some context here with this story. So one of my mutuals, his name is Nuno. He's based out in Portugal. He actually posted this tweet over the weekend where he writes, India, the weakest link in Brics, rejected the admission of Algeria into Brics Plus at the behest of France. Modi, who visited France before the summit, signed weapons deals at marked up prices, and this. Modi is such a cuck, clearly making India the weakest of all BRICS nations. So he wrote that, and I saw it, and I was like, is there an article supporting this? Would love to report on this on 9 News this week. And of course, I'll give you credit.
So here's your credit.
And within 20 minutes, in the DMs, he gave me a receipt.
Cool.
So shout out to Nuno. This story is in your, and hopefully I will do it some justice. Here's the receipt that he sent to me. So this is from the cradle.co. India vetoed Algeria's BRICS Plus entry at France request report. So according to this article, Algeria's long-awaited ascension to BRICS Plus failed to materialize last week during the bloc summit in South Africa, as Arabic media says India had used this veto against the North African nation at the request of France. Informed sources that spoke with Algeria's Desert Tube say French intelligence contacted their Indian counterparts ahead of the BRICS Plus summit to urge New Delhi into vetoing Algeria's entry into the bloc, describing the move as revenge for Algiers' growing influence in the Sahel region at the expense of France, and as a way to slow down burgeoning ties between Algeria and China. Tensions between Paris and Algiers spike after a military junta ousted French-backed government in Niger, in the latest example of a growing anti-West movement in the Sahel. Since then, Algeria has opposed an ECOWAS military operation in Niger, emphasized the role of diplomacy in bringing about a peaceful solution to the crisis, and refused permission for French military aircraft to fly over Algerian airspace.
Look at my African American over here. Look at him. Are you the greatest? Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay.
But it said it's not African American.
Whatever. Same difference.
The French plot took shape in the wake of a failed bid by President Emmanuel Macron to attend the summit in South Africa. India saw an opportunity in the request from Paris, as officials were reported offered Western help to fill the void left in former French colonies that had recently risen against neocolonial rule and extend its influence in the vital continent for BRICS Plus. While France has maintained close ties with successful Indian governments for decades, being the only European permanent member of the UN Security Council that supported India's nuclearization in 1998, their relationship has grown closer under Macron, who in 2019 supported India's position at the UN over occupied Kashmir and has sealed multiple defense agreements with the South Asian nation. In 2018, Macron declared during a visit to India that France must be India's best partner in Europe and its gateway to the European continent.
Collin, did you also see that the Vatican wanted to oversee these Brics like meetings recently?
I did not know that. I did not know that, actually.
So that's me and Lucy talked about it, and you know, she was going at some people who were against it, and I was kind of like, yeah, the Vatican has always tried to position for best advantage, you know,
right?
Like, and that's
Catholic
what this
Church,
is,
everyone,
right? Like, it doesn't matter who the Pope is; it could be a nice Pope, but you know, we're talking. They want to continue to exploit the global South through their, you know, religious
in the guise of religion, right? But
yes,
you know, but as a proxy for neo.
It's also they've also always been connected to the global powers, including France, including Italy. Like, they literally are their own country. Keep that in mind.
Right.
The Vatican.
Well, just Western Europe in general. Western Europe in general.
Yes, but I mean, the Vatican itself is its own government entity that wants to protect its own assets and resources. So a lot of which are in the global South. Hate to tell you.
Right.
Yes. So
anyway,
you know,
nonetheless, India's veto against Algeria led to a dispute with China during the voting process, which reportedly almost caused the failure of the Johannesburg summit. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva also opposed Algeria's entry, according to Anadolu Agency.
Yep, which we talked about connections with him too, to the you know, powers that be.
Right.
So
China sees great potential in the North African country joining BRICS Plus due to its massive fuel reserves, minimal national debt, and strategic location between Europe and sub-Saharan Africa. China is also funding the rehabilitation of the strategic port of El Hamina, as Algeria remains an essential part of the Belt and Road Initiative. Russia has similarly voiced its
you mean
support.
China also has fucking economic reasons for the Belt and Road Initiative, and it's not just okay. Just wanted to check on that. Cool. Good to know.
Russia has similarly voiced its support for Algeria's entry to the Global South Bloc, which last week formally invited Iran, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, and Ethiopia to join its ranks.
Interesting.
But while Algeria surpasses Ethiopia in the size of the economy and oil production and the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Argentina, Egypt, and Ethiopia, in terms of the volume of gas exports, the country does not control any strategic water straits or host any major regional institutions.
Among the many African nations who are starting to get more oil production than some of these Middle Eastern places. We've covered that before.
Well, I did not pull this, but there is a pipeline, and this is part of where Nigeria also plays a role in this.
Yeah.
There's a pipeline that runs from Nigeria through Algeria.
Yes.
I think the majority of the pipeline runs through Algeria to Morocco and essentially like Italy and Spain. So given its importance in terms of oil, you know, I feel that's also part of the reason. Well, there's more to France and Algeria, which I'll get to after this part. But I'm sure that's also part of the reason why France was like, you know, like India pull us a solid and say no. Like, you know, but I'll get more into that in a second.
I mean, from what I've seen here is that the countries that still have relations with Western powers, being China and India are getting some cold feet on some things. Cool.
And Brazil.
Yes. All three of those.
Previous reports on why Algeria was left out in the cold have also pointed to the nation's dependence on oil and gas revenues sometimes reaching 98% of the economy. The size of the economy was also questioned as it amounted to about 192 billion in 2022, according to World Bank figures, while the country's growth rate falls just below the 5% threshold of Brics Plus nations.
Well, we know there's some fucking numbering there.
Yes.
With regards to the World Bank, we've covered that directly.
Right. So I actually got curious, as I do, because, and again, we learned shit here. But first thought was for me, what's Algeria's connection to France? Given that it is a francophone country, so what's their issue? So that's kind of where I started. I'll get into India later.
Okay.
But here, but I wanted to play this short video that kind of talks about, it's a kind of cartoon, but it's short and kind of funny, but it kind of talks about Algeria and its relation to France, and why I think, as I said, potentially this was another reason why France was like, nah, you know, don't let Algeria become a part of Brics. So
cool.
When colonial powers grab territory, it usually stays separate from the lands of the metropole. India was a part of the British Empire but not a part of Britain. The Philippines were a part of the Spanish Empire but not Spain. But when the French first conquered Algeria, it wasn't long until it was incorporated into France proper. Not as a colony, but just as much a part of France as Normandy or Corsica. And given just how irregular this was, why did France do this? Why was Algeria a part of France itself and not a colony? So, as of 1827, this region was known as the Regency of Algiers, which officially was an Ottoman puppet state, but realistically it was independent. During the Napoleonic Wars, Algiers had provided food for Napoleon's armies, and 25 years later, its leaders were calling in the debt. France said no, tempers fled, and King Charles X blockaded the country to get its leaders to submit. They did not. This problem was timed well for King Charles, who was in a bit of trouble back at home, and so to divert attention away from him, he ordered the invasion of the region. The Algiers military was defeated quickly, but guerrilla-style resistance would carry on long afterwards. In case you're wondering, this expedition did little for Charles, since he would be gone soon afterwards, but his successor, Louis Philippe, would oversee the conquest of these lands until 1848, which was a year in which, well, stuff happened. One of these stuff was when King Louis Philippe was unkingified and the Second French Republic was proclaimed. A new republican constitution was drafted, which importantly proclaimed that these areas in Algeria were formerly a part of France. The primary reason for this was that the creators of the constitution were worried that the ongoing instability in France could end up losing them Algeria. They were concerned that either the Ottomans or another European power would make an attempt to take it from them, or that whoever was appointed to govern it may side against the government if there was another revolution. As such, it was divided into 3 administrative sections and made a formal part of the country. And you would expect that as an integral part of this new republic, the Algerians would be given the same rights as any other Frenchman, but fun fact, no. Despite being a part of France proper, citizenship was reserved for 2 groups. Those called the Pied Noirs, the descendants of French and European settlers, and in 1870, after Napoleon III reformed the government, Algeria's native Jewish population. There were 2 reasons for this. The first was money, since the Jewish...
So, you notice who became citizens in Algeria, right?
Yes, the white people.
The white people and the Jews.
Yes. Who are also near the Caucasus Mountains. I'll say that.
Right.
Right.
So, you know, so basically, and I'll go in, and I'm sure it's going to go, but basically, think of Algeria, think of it the equivalent to Quebec and Louisiana here in the States. So
very similar.
The idea, probably pretty much almost the same exact shit.
Yes.
Is that the natives didn't have any rights, but the idea, like, Algeria was essentially a colony of France. So it was essentially France. And the idea was French people would go over to these colonies to supplant the natives. Well, in our case, in Quebec and Louisiana, to supplant the Native Americans living in those regions.
Well, I think it still affects things now, right? Like a former heavyweight champion of the UFC, Francis Ngannou, had to go from Nigeria to, I think, Algeria, so that he could get to France.
Right. Yes.
You know.
So it's still I mean, there's still a lot of that stuff in effect, but like the idea basically was, you know, Algeria was essentially a colony of France and an extension of France. And the idea is that they wanted Frenchmen living there.
Yes.
To, you know, essentially create a France in Africa.
Like
basically.
How the British did India and South Africa and Australia.
Yeah. So take
Empire.
any colonialist power,
Yeah.
take any colonialist power, take any white people, put them anywhere in the global south.
Yeah.
They become the majority and essentially, so basically gentrifying the bitch.
Yes.
You know, so
cool. Brought those hipster coffee shops and everything, you know?
Right. So just giving that context, but also again, this is why we kind of have to look at history, because
and
a lot
the
of
hipster mustaches
kind of see. Right.
You know?
But again, but happened in Africa, this is exactly what happened in the States here.
Yep.
In terms of Quebec and Louisiana, same shit.
Yep.
But anyway,
Algerians would be expected to pay taxes to fund things like wars against.
But they'll still take your fucking taxes. Got it. Okay. Gotta take your wheat, serfs.
Prussia. And second, by making hundreds of thousands of Algerians French, he gave them a stake in preserving French rule there, meaning that there would be allies if things ever got interesting. The Muslims of Algeria got nothing and were only considered to be French subjects. And they were, by and large, treated the exact same as the natives in any other French colony, like in neighbouring Tunisia or Morocco. So what changed?
Morocco, yeah.
Well, the process of France losing Algeria was a slow one. There were no attempts to placate or help the native Muslims of the region until it became clear that there was a risk of losing Algeria for good. At first, it was believed that the ideals of the French Revolution and the superiority of French culture were so obvious that the native population would slowly but surely assimilate and become French themselves. Shockingly, this didn't happen, but after 2 world wars, the French population wanted to recognise the contributions of Algerians to the wars. Thus, in 1947, the French government gave citizenship and thus voting rights to Muslims in Algeria. Too late for any of that, though, since many of those living there wanted the French gone, and so it was time for war. The French fought incredibly hard to keep the colony, since it didn't want to abandon the idea of its civilizing mission, nor did it want to accept that it couldn't defend the French living in Algeria. The problem was that bullets don't care about your pride, and once the death toll started to rise, it became clear that France couldn't hold the territory. Numerous governments fell over the issue, and in the end it was only Charles de Gaulle, whose prestige allowed him to admit defeat and retain any popularity, that Algeria's position as a formal part of France came to an end. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thank you for watching, with a special...
So yeah, so that's the deal with Algeria and France. So basically France is acting like the ex-boyfriend who wants to get revenge on his ex-girlfriend in terms of, you know, calling India a favor and basically being like, don't veto against them becoming a part of Brics, because even though they're not really, Algeria is now independent, it's still the idea of like how much worth that Algeria has to Europe, especially with the pipeline that's going right through their country. And I'm sure now, given that, you know, the West has put sanctions on Russia in terms of oil, that's something, you know, that, you know, France could exploit if they needed to, but also given its ties to Nigeria, again, with ECOWAS as well. So it's all connected, folks. That's why we do these things. So, so that kind of satisfied my curiosity regarding France and its relationship to Algeria, which honestly I should have known this from French classes in high school, but they don't teach you this kind of stuff or make no connection there. So as Nuno said, you know, like Modi was in France last 2 months ago. So I was like, why? And just looking at pictures, you know, just briefly online, they're chummy, like BFFs, basically. So I was like, all right, what's the deal with this? So
there's military like equipment.
Yep.
You know?
Well, as you said, there's military deals that are being made with India and France for decades. So I pulled this last minute. This is an Al Jazeera article. Also, and this is something I want to check.
Shout out to Al Jazeera recently for covering the Gray Zone's GoFundMe thing. That was good of them.
Oh,
They
yeah.
don't do that often.
Right.
So
Not gonna read the whole thing, but I read enough of it that kind of talks about why this relationship, why the bromance between Modi and Macron. So Rifat Farid writes, military deals in focus as France rolls out red carpet for Modi. So just to give you some context, Modi he was present at their Bastille Day celebrations back in July, just to give you some context in that. So, there we go.
Yep.
So analysts say that while France and India have differing positions on the Russian-Ukraine war, we know that France is for it, India is against it, basically. These views are unlikely to impact the foundations of their relationship. Janoy Joshi, a senior analyst at the New Delhi-based Observer Research Foundation, told Al Jazeera that the visit will focus on India-France ties, and it's not really aimed at the European situation, Ukraine, I guess.
Yeah.
The difference between the Indian position and that of France is well known and is unlikely to be an issue, Joshi said. France strongly supports Ukraine, has sent military aid to Kyiv while pressuring Russian President Vladimir Putin to stop the conflict. By contrast, India has maintained a publicly neutral stance and snapped up Russian oil. Even with that, now this is what Nuno told me based on what he spoke he actually spoke to Indians living there in India right now to kind of verify this. Oil in India, like according to the petrol prices there, have remained, they've plateaued. Yeah, they've been pretty low. But Russia has been making bank out of oil. So the question is, where's the profit going? Because the Indian people are not necessarily benefiting from that. So basically Modi is pocketing it for his donors basically in India. So, and again, we hope to have Nuno come and talk about this because he said he wanted to do more of a write-up on this. And I tried to get more information to kind of
make a Substack, dude. We got you.
Yeah, yeah, so I already told him that. I said, write Substack, will report you and even better, try and get you on. So, but he's been ill, so feel better because he's been in the hospital. But yeah, we hope to get you on soon to kind of speak more onto this since you've been studying this for a while. But anyway, even so, Joshi said Modi's visit will boost the pair's relationship. France has a view of strategic autonomy, which is much like that of India. As for the defense industry, again, the relationship is old, and India is seeking to move it now from arms transfer and co-development to joint development of weapons and systems. As for France, Joshi believes Paris is looking to India as an important market for its high-tech industry. On Thursday, the Indian body in charge of approving military acquisition gave a nod to the procurement of 26 Rafale fighter aircraft from France. India's defense ministry added that the Defense Acquisition Council also gave an initial approval to the purchase of 3 additional Scorpion-class submarines. India has been purchasing French military gear for decades, and the new deals are reportedly worth about $10 billion. Indian security experts say defense acquisitions allow New Delhi to diversify its military hardware partners and reduce its dependency on aging Russian military equipment. So basically it sounds like
they don't want the old stuff. They want new stuff.
Right. New, more high tech.
Yes. Yep.
From 2018 to 2022, France emerged as India's second largest arms supplier, accounting for 29% of imports, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Parv Satam, a foreign policy expert and editor of Eurasia Times, told Al Jazeera that unlike the United States, France will not try to persuade India to turn on Russia or pressure Modi to take a harder line on Moscow. France knows India will stick to its neutral stance, and a joint statement, if there is one after PM Modi and President Macron meet, might not see a reference to Ukraine. India's individual statement will also continue to refer to the war as the Ukraine conflict. Satam said India is likely seeking greater French participation in defense programs that involve manufacturing in India. So that's where it goes right there.
Yep.
This includes localization of manufacturing defense aerospace components and devices, he said. Such deals deliver greater benefits to Indian industry in terms of job creation and access to advanced military scientific technology. France is not willing to make such deals, he added. According to Christophe Jaffrelot, professor of Indian politics and sociology at King's India Institute, the ties between India and France are dominated by security objectives. In the India Express, he wrote, official narratives do emphasize structural affinities to such democratic like-mindedness, but what matters are more common security-related interests. Another area in which India and France align on is China, Jaffrelot said, explaining that while Macron is concerned with Chinese expansionism, India is equally worried about the growing influence of China in its neighborhood. So, yeah. So basically, as I said, there's a lot more that goes into this regarding Modi and how he's established as hell, authoritarian as hell, and, you know, like doing everything on part of the West while seemingly, and I say seemingly because, again, Nuno said to me, like, in India, they haven't even talked about the BRICS conferences at all on their mainstream media. If anything, they're talking about the G20 summit that is going to take place next week. I forgot where. But anything regarding BRICS has not been mentioned in India at all. And so, like I said, we definitely want to get Nuno on to kind of give more light into what's happening in India. But basically, they're like, Modi has one foot basically riding the fence between, you know, seemingly kind of doing the right thing in terms of being part of BRICS, but also being at the hand of Macron and the West in terms of, and I'm sure like with Pakistan also, I think that's also part of that issue too, given that Pakistan is its neighbor and they don't do so hot. But, you know, but yeah, there seems to, as someone said earlier, that there seems to be the mega powers in BRICS do not seem to be working in full support of the action of the intent of BRICS, that they still have their hand in Western interests, which I don't know. It can make, you know, this looks bad, essentially, or it worries me in terms of what the future of BRICS Plus will be, in, you know, in terms of having these interests that are not necessarily aligned with the global South.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
so
I agree.
It's
and with that, and you see the Vatican trying to get in on this, you see other countries trying to, at least if it's like, if you can't beat them, you might as well join them. Like, you might as well figure out how to work with them. So
right, yeah, and that's funny. Like in one of the threads that I'm in, because someone asked that Nico answered, you know, like, is there a possibility that France will join BRICS? And
sure,
Nico
maybe.
said, you know, maybe, like maybe not now, but down the road, sure. You know, which almost defeats the purpose of having BRICS at all.
Yeah,
so,
but it depends on who are they trying to compete with? You know,
right? But then again, like if in thinking about it, that might make sense if France continues to lose a lot of its colonial ties in West Africa, in particular, in terms of the exports that they're able to obtain from them in Nigeria and Mali, and I would say that Algeria is part of this too.
Yeah,
you know, it could very well be that they may end up being in BRICS just in a way to kind of sustain what they had or losing.
Right.
in
And
terms of the
if it grants them
uprisings in
more,
Africa. And
if it
things.
grants them control of these resources in any capacity, they'll take it. Like
Right.
France, like whatever. If it's that or no more uranium,
Right.
like so.
And
But
then
yeah,
with
anyway.
India, with India, real quick, just the idea of like taking care of itself. But again, according to Nuno, like the working class in India are not benefiting from any of this at all. So, like I said, I want him to speak more on this. So I hope we're able to get him so he's able to kind of share more. Because but India's basically going through some shit as well. So but again, shout out to you, Nuno. Thank you for your work on this. And write that Substack article.
We'll keep in touch.